it's the quiet moments in this that are, you know, my favorite and the best. And, you know, this one's just full of quiet moments, right? No, there's not many of those here. Actually, we do start with a relatively quiet moment, which is we pick up here with Guts sitting down and wrestling with his decision. And he's afraid, like for the first time, feels fear in a long time. But we pick up with Guts wrestling with his decision of leaving and missing his people and questioning himself, to be quite honest, as to whether or not he knows that it was the right decision, but he still feel sadness for leaving, you know. And it's just a nice touch. We don't sit on it, we don't dwell on it, but it's just nice to have that moment acknowledged by Miura before this picks up, because this is going to pick up and this is going to start to become crazy very, very quickly. When he's interrupted by the most cartoonishly looking demon I have seen possibly yet. I mean, let's be real, some of these demons are cartoon, but it's after the section that we've been reading, to be quite honest, it caught me kind of a little off guard. Like he just pops up like, ah, and you got this skull demon and the horse, and you're like, what the fuck is this? Oh, but just wait. But anyway, he gives him this prophecy. In a year's time, blah, 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 you know, you'll all meet in a place or something. Super vague, and you're like, really? And at this point, we have officially switched gears. Again, yeah, any conceptions that you had built up from the last arc, throw them out. And we officially move into a section of the story that is going to be extremely difficult to discuss, and Miura is making this very hard for me to talk about on the internet or YouTube, because I don't know how to even say some of this without getting, you know, without upsetting the gods of YouTube. And also somehow, if you're still holding up like a little candle for, you know, Griffith might not be such a bad guy. Now, any and all hopes of him, you know, being a somewhat decent guy at his core are pretty much gone, because what happens is just monstrous. Because he is a monster. I mean, and we all know this, but he's a very charismatic monster up to this point. So, and even this is done with charisma to an extent at the beginning, and you're like, really? And you know what? Good for him. He doesn't even make it out of the fucking castle. You know, that kind of made me happy when he's immediately caught, and I'm like, good for you. You served you right, asshole. But then he goes straight into twisting the knife into the king, and he's got that weird, that slippery tongue of his, and he's like, oh, you know, you wanted XYZ. And he just sticks the knife in and twists a few things with the king, that he then pushes the king off a cliff mentally, and he does something that I would argue is debatable if it ever even would have happened, if it weren't for Guts' little flippity flapping of his damn tongue. Very debatable. Well, you could argue that one till the cows come home, I'm sure. But just the sheer level of trauma that is on display in this manga over and over and over again with any number of the characters it's heavy, and I don't recommend that anyone pick any of this up lightly or read some of these sections too lightly, because they are hard to read at times, hard to even look at, really. To be quite frank, I'm just going to move on, because I feel any dive by myself into this particular section, I feel like I am unqualified to do so, and any deep dive I tried to do would be inadequate. So we're just going to kind of move on. But basically at this point, so now Griffith is locked in the deepest, darkest dungeon that there is, and the Band of the Hawk is ambushed. And then from there, we literally just flash forward a year. You know, if you thought when this started out, in a year's time, you know, you thought, oh man, that's a prophecy that's going to come to pass like later on in the book. No, it's going to come to pass in like 10 pages, because we're just going to time jump that year that demon that I was talking about, if that made any sense. Yeah, here we are now. Year's over. But, because actually these little time jumps, you're like, really? We're just going to skip the whole year? And then you realize how big this is. You're like, yeah, that year would have just killed me. So gladly, we move forward a year. And Guts is walking into a town, and there's a contest going on, and boy, he wants in on it. And it's a contest that's ultimately no contest. But it does introduce some colorful characters. And to be quite honest, at this point, a lot of the characters being introduced, they're very different than what we've had in the past. And we're going to start to inject some very, should I say, a lot of the characters from here forward, or at least in the block that I just read, are going to start to feel very Street Fighter-esque. Especially the guy that, with all the eyeliner on. And ultimately this section here, the town, really doesn't serve as much more of anything than to just tell Guts about the Band of the Hawk and what happened to them and what state that they're in right now. So we get back to the Band of the Hawk then, and we get to see the state that they're in 1 year later, and just how small they've become, and just how many of them are gone, and we get to see the state that Casca's in, and just how overworked she is and exhausted, and she can't even sit in a chair really without falling asleep, let alone trying to function in the role and at the capacity that she is currently attempting to force herself to function at and under. And we also get to see that the band is slowly putting together their intel on Griffith. I mean, they have not forgotten about him and have not given up on him. How they're getting this information out, whatever. But we're seeing them actively gathering information. So when the next step comes and they need to go in, we understand that they've been collecting this information for a while now. And the guy with the eyeliner attacks, and Guts intervenes, and it goes just about the way that you would expect, with the guy just getting repeatedly slapped a lot before he runs away. The Band of the Hawk reacting extremely predictably to Guts's return, meaning certain members are going to accept him with open arms. The kids, with Richter and Judeo, is that how you say that? I don't know. But they're pretty thrilled to see him. What's his name? Corcus is going to be pissed, because Corcus always is. Casca, of course, is going to be real Casca about it for about 5 seconds. And then, of course, we spend absolutely no time getting right down to business with Guts and Casca. And I mean that on so many different levels. But honestly, this section is absolutely great, and I really did like this section too, especially the conversation end of it. No, but seriously, because we get some of those quieter, softer moments that I like so much in this manga, and we get some beats in there that I think are just some of the most important of this whole section, being that Casca admits to Guts in that moment when he walked away, in her mind, he was more important to her in that moment than Griffith was. And that's big, both for Casca to admit and for Guts to hear. And it doesn't appear that it was easy for her to even come to terms with on a deeper level for herself. And then we get their first embrace, for lack of a better word, and it's wonderful all the way up until it's not. And that goes so dark so fast, and I was legitimately scared. Like, it's over. It's not going to get a chance to be explained. Like, holy crap, what just happened? Like, we all get it. We all understand the reaction and the trauma and what just happened. But you're like, oh no, Casca. You're right. But no, it doesn't go that way. I love it when things don't go the way I expect them to. And it does take the time to pause. And then he does get a second to... she doesn't freak out and run. She sticks around long enough to him then get a chance to kind of pour some of himself out and just lay himself down and just open himself up to somebody for the first time ever. Again, in a different way now, all in the same moment. It's really, oh my gosh, it's good. And it ends in yet just another embrace of her understanding and then accepting of him on yet a deeper level. Some of the chapters between Guts and Casca are the best chapters in this manga, and I stand by that. By the way, when he's explaining some of this stuff to Casca, I think he remembers Gambino with some like really rose-colored glasses, because he talked of him far more fondly than I remember him as I was experiencing that section of the story. But then, you know, and then sometimes you'll get a page where, to be quite frank, Muir asks a lot of you by looking at a few simple images. I still have a hard time coming to terms with just how impactful some of this stuff is. And then thankfully, we get a little bit of lightheartedness when Guts and Casca start arguing and bantering back and forth, and it starts to feel a little bit more less heavy. That lifts you up just enough that you're like, man, I needed that one. I was starting to feel pretty bad there for a second. Anyway, and then you get one of the most ridiculously cliche, I've been training in the mountains with an old man under a waterfall scenes, or whatever the heck that was. It's like those beats, you're like, really? Which all ends in, another one of my favorite moments is when Guts finally asks Casca to come with him. And understandably, he would never have done that before because she was too ingrained in the Man of the Hawk, and he would never have done that to his friend Griffith. But he's at a point now in the story where he finally asks Casca, just come with me. When this is all over, I'm leaving, but I want you to come with me. And I thought, I loved it. I really did. I don't know where this is going, but in this moment, I was really there for it. And then we flash to the dungeon with Griffith, and we get a little flash inside of Griffith's head. We don't get many of these. And we get to see that Griffith's obsession with Guts went way deeper than I thought it did. I knew he was something special to Griffith. I knew he was more than just a regular member of the Band of the Hawk. To me, it was still just a pawn that he was manipulating, and that is still true. But his obsession with him just went deeper than I had actually been aware of. And then, you know, last video I was talking about, I really wish I knew more about Griffith's backstory. And hey, we get one page of him as a boy. I hope that's teasing more because I'm just like, really? And that was it. I grew up in an alley playing with wooden toys, looking at castles. And you're like, that big bad guy's backstory is he's okay. Anyway, so then some creepy snot creatures ooze out of a hole in the floor and speak a little bit more prophecy to Griffith this time about what his fate is going to eventually be, which is, that's not creepy. But back at the Band of the Hawk, we're now off to save Griffith. And I'm not gonna lie, at literally no point in this did I feel good about it, saving Griffith. There are parts in the story earlier where he's so charismatic that you almost forget how horrible and monstrous and creepy and frightening this man really is. You know, there's literally moments where like something will happen and just maybe even it's just the way he's drawn, where you're just like, oh, you know, you're not such a horrible guy, are you? But that's not this. Nothing in this chunk gave you that feeling. So when they're like, you know, they're all gearing up and they look like they're really motivated to go do this, and the whole time I'm just like, I don't like this. Leave him there. Nothing about it felt good. But anyway, they get there, and we've got an inside man in the castle, and guess what? The inside man is the princess. No surprise there. And then when they get down to the tower, the princess absolutely insists on going in. No surprise there. Then we get the creature from the Black Swordsman returning to kill all of the Band of the Hawk, except for, oh God, Richter? There's like the little kid with the long hair and the little kid with the short hair, and I'm struggling to get some of these names down. But Richter is left alive. But anyway, the creature from the Black Swordsman comes back, which I thought was a great callback. Because this is another one of those things that I didn't get right away. It's one of those things where, like the sword, when I'm like, that guy looks familiar. And as I was like leafing through the pages to kind of put some notes together for this video, I was like, God, why does he look familiar? And I went back and I grabbed my other book and the Black Swordsman arc, and I found him. I'm like, that's him. I got happy about figuring it out, which probably I should have figured out sooner, let's be honest. But also, real quick, I didn't notice until I was back in that first book going through the Black Swordsman arc just how much this art has evolved in just this amount of time. My jaw hit the floor at some of those, dare I say, crude drawings in the Black Swordsman. Wow. Anyway, but everybody gets killed but Richter. And Skull Knight comes and literally saves him. At this point, it feels super convenient. Like, these demons just keep popping up in random places to do random things and save random people and set random things up, and it feels very sporadic, and a lot of times it feels very convenient to the plot in that moment. So I'm just kind of accepting some of the things that are happening at this point. I try not to think about them too hard, because then I might get overly critical, and then I might start to, yeah. But anyway, we get into the tower, we go straight down. There's literally no resistance in getting into the town, into the castle, into the tower, down to the bottom. We don't meet any resistance whatsoever. We just go straight to Griffith. And I really honestly felt bad for the Hawks in this moment when they see Griffith and what he's become and what they've done to him. They're not prepared for what they find down there in the dungeon. And I don't know if Griffith deserved that, if I'm being quite honest. Griffith is a bad dude, but I don't know if Griffith has done anything so horrible as to justify what happens to him in this dungeon. That's pretty terrible. I mean, it's pretty awful. And it's actually pretty terrifying what they did to him, just because of the fact that he is a bad dude, taking what kind of a man that he is, and you combined it with what they just did to him, and what if he survives this, which we all know he does, what this will do to him. That's immediately terrifying. But anyway, now they get caught, finally, and Guts goes berserk. See what I did there? And I honestly feel really bad for anyone in his way right now. And by the way, what in God's name happened to the king? I know he's probably had a rough year, but damn. But he then does this, summon the Bakaraka. And I'm like, immediately, my bullshit alarms going off. I'm like, really? Summon the Bakaraka? Let me get this straight. You had a fort that you spent 100 years trying to get, and you couldn't get into this fort. So you call on the Band of the Hawk. Now, the Band of the Hawk is breaking into your castle, and you're just like, summon the Bakaraka. Like, you just have another group of people that you think is good enough to take out the Band of the Hawk just on call? Really? I'm sorry. Bull, you got somebody just floating in the wings waiting. Anyway. By the way, I did mention that Street Fighter thing with, you know, the Street Fighter characters. And before I move on, I do just want to mention the, like, illegitimate child of Dulcime and Vega. But I digress. But anyway, this does lead to one of the most legitimately satisfying and fun sections of this whole run to read was, yes, there's this really weird, we just poisoned the princess, so we're just going to pause the battle. It's like, there's like this big battle going on, the princess gets poisoned, and it's like, everybody's just like, time out! And everyone just stops to be like, we'll take her because, you know, poison and stuff. And they're like, oh, yeah, right, you can have her. And then they get her over here, and they're like, okay, we ready? Yes, game on! And they just go back to fight. You're like, really? But that aside, it's one of the most fun sections of what I read. Just as far as the action and the fighting, and I'm like, this is really great. But by far out of that whole section, the coolest thing, my favorite, was Judeo, and whatever that little section was with him, that was great. He hasn't gotten a moment to shine ever. I probably got more excited when that scene played out than I probably should have, but it was really great. But anyway, he does his thing, and it opens up an opportunity for everybody else to run in, and it's just like chop chop, and it's over. Fine. By the way, can we just pause to all acknowledge the fact of just how creepy Griffith is? At no point during this, I know I haven't talked about him a lot, but at no point during any of this run, ever since we get him back, does Miura let you forget that he's there, even though he can't move and he can't speak. No, at no point does he let you forget that he's there and that he's creepy. Every shot of just his face or his eye or his helmet is so unsettling, and I don't like him being there. But anyway, so the king gets his daughter back, and immediately summon the Black Dog Knights or whatever they are. And I'm like, okay. Like, if my bullshit meter went off for the Bakaraka, I was just like, are you kidding me right now? You know, you have the idea of suspension of disbelief, and they're really testing my ability to do that at this point in the story. I'm like, come on. But it's okay. Although in defense of this decision here, this is ultimately now going to lead to a demon fight that falls in line with everything else that we've got so far, demon-wise. So it's going to play right into where we need the story to be. So it's understandable why he's doing what he's doing, but it's just like, I don't know. And I remember those quiet moments that I was talking about? Yeah, we still don't have any of them. But we do get Corcus, and he shows up, and that's a really cool panel. I like that one. And they battle for a bit with the Demon Dog Knights, or the Demon Knight thingy, whatever's. And then the Demon Dog transforms, or the monkey, whatever he is, transforms. And you get this shot of him, and then it cuts to Guts, and he goes, "It's just what I imagined." And I'm going, really? That's what you imagined? Like, under no circumstances would I have imagined that ever. So that got a good chuckle out of me. But we get to this battle, and now this feels like one of those big, epic demon battles that we've only got a couple of so far, to be quite honest, out of all of this massive mess that I've read. I'm on book 4 at this point. But it feels like one of those big Berserk battles between Guts, and the last one, he got stomped by Zod. So this one, and this time he doesn't have Griffith, and he's genuinely, he feels alone, and he feels like the underdog, and he's really gonna have to fight this one out. So as silly as it was, the Demon Dog's introduction, the fight that comes, the fight is great. And Guts gets appropriately stomped through the whole thing, and it's really, really good. Up until the point where he surprisingly does like this hide in the shadows sneak attack, which is how he ends up coming out on top of this one. Kudos to you, Guts, really. Super satisfying end of the fight. I loved it. And then finally, we get one of those smaller, quieter moments, and it's this one is between Guts and Griffith. It's not quiet because Griffith can't talk. That's not what I mean. No, seriously, one of those quieter moments. It's Griffith reaching out to his armor for some reason. I'm not entirely fully sure. You know, I think it's just because he used to be so strong, and now he's so pathetic almost, maybe. And Guts misreading the whole thing, and he's like, "Oh, you haven't changed a bit in the past year, have you?" No, Guts, I think he has. I hate to break it to you, but I think he has. But it's even as creepy as Griffith is, it's somehow such a tender moment watching Guts dress his old friend in his armor. I don't know. There's something soft and touching about it on Guts's end. Griffith is just creepy. I stand by that. And then right in the middle of it, we get a surprise attack from the Demon Dog thing, just long enough for Zod to show up and basically rip him in half, which is more of these demons, Zod and the Skull Knight, showing up to just conveniently do things at convenient times to prophesize this coming event that's getting ready to happen. Basically, Zod rips him in half, and it boils down to, don't mess with these ones. We have something planned for these ones, and it's not time. What is time and what will happen when it's time, we don't know. But we're gonna end this, I ended this with the shot of the demon reverted back to his original form, which is a withered old man, shriveled up looking little old man. Can anyone say foreshadowing? But that's where I had to call it a day. Way too much was happening, and I was like, yep, this is cutting it here, and we'll pick up here next time. Holy crap. Anyway, all right, I'm gonna give this an 8.5, just like I did the last video. But I have a hard time doing that just because I think the last section was actually a little bit better. Not that this wasn't great, because I'm going to go ahead and give it an 8.5, just like I gave that one. But I honestly think that the last run leading up to Guts leaving Griffith was slightly better than this. But this one did a lot of heavy lifting in setting up what's getting ready to happen. And I think that's where all of this is going to pay off. Because I think my next chunk is probably going to end the Golden Age. And that might be a big event. I mean, reading it is going to be a bit. We all know there's going to be a big event in there. But I think just the act of reading it in and of itself is going to be an event. Anyway, everybody, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.